Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome to another edition of Liberty with Love with Robin Koerner. There are some very serious events going on up in North Dakota right now. Americans perhaps don't know enough about the experience of those people descended from those from whom we took land to be here. And I include myself in that group of Americans that really do not know enough about the Native American experience. And with everything going on right now in North Dakota about the pipeline, which I know most of my listeners will know something about, it's a good time, I think, to address it. And I am going to address it today with a lady called Robin Koerner, who I know is going to approach this from an angle that I and my listeners cannot often find very compelling. Let's put it that way. Robin is a libertarian, commentator, and indigenous rights activist. Although she's born in southeastern Oklahoma, she was raised in north central Texas, currently lives in Phoenix, but importantly is of Choctaw, Dakota, and Irish descent. And, well, Robin, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
How are your people doing in America today?
Oh, well, we always joke that since 1492 it hasn't been going so hot for us, but it's not going so well currently. However, there is a stay right now for portions of a pipeline that are going under the Missouri River right now. They have not issued them a permit to go 20 miles on either side of the river. They can't go underneath the river yet.
So hold on. So first of all, let's take this right back to basics. Who's the they?
All right. So Dakota Access Pipeline is a pipeline that is owned by Energy Transfer Partners, LLC. They're based out of Dallas, Texas, and they are building a pipeline that runs from the Bakken oil fields, and they want to get it down to Illinois and sell it.
Okay. Where are those oil fields?
The Bakken oil fields are in North Dakota, Montana area. It's a Bakken shale. It's very dirty oil. It's a very nasty crude oil in the Bakkens.
Okay. And so the reason that we are hearing about it now, the reason that a lot of Native people are so engaged over this is what exactly? Let's kind of go back, because I know you really do have to go back a long way to some old treaties to really understand the basis of the grievance. And as I said at the top of the show, a lot of this is about property rights.
It is. It all goes back to property rights, centrally property rights. So you'll hear a lot of people on either side say that it's not about property rights or that don't have a good understanding of property. But the way that I come into it is property rights, because I think that that's where we all need to begin. So brief history, 10 to 12,000 years we've lived in this area. Native people have lived in that area. It's always been a part of it. We have multiple tribes, over 10 tribes and their subgroups that have lived in that area. So Poncas, Otos, Missourias, which happen to be the people that the Missouri River is named after. The Omahas, which is where Omaha, Nebraska is named after. The Great Sioux Nation, or Oceti Sakowin, as we call ourselves, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations. Arikara, Hidatsa, Mandan, Gros Venturas, Blackfeet, and also the Crow are all from this general area from where that's starting to where they want it to end. And we've always settled along the Missouri River.
So when you say starting, you're talking about from where the pipeline is to start to where it is to end, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And that's just known history. We've always been there. We've always settled it for the last 10 to 12,000 years. Enter in everything that we know about Native culture, smallpox blankets, all of this kind of stuff. In in 1851, the U.S. government signed a treaty with the Great Sioux Nation, the Oceti-Sakowin, which is the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations. Okay. In 1851, they signed this treaty because in what is present-day Minnesota, which is east of the Missouri River, it was being highly settled at that time. So they needed to figure out a way to stop some of the clashes that were going on between Plains natives, mainly the Sioux, very warlike people, that were happening at that time. So they signed the Treaty of 1851 to end that battle that was going on. So there was a huge swath that took over many states, North Dakota, South Dakota, parts of Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana. All of that was considered Sioux land. And in the treaty, they said that settlers would not be permitted to go past a line on a piece of paper, which was very foreign to us at the time. We didn't really understand how that issue, but we had our geographical markers on where we could go and where white people couldn't go or settlers couldn't go. It's not a race thing. It was just a property rights issue. This is our land. We hunt off of it. We fish off of it. Basically, in that treaty, it said that we owned everything up until the eastern border of the Missouri River. So we owned all of the water and the riverbed as well. So that was the Treaty of 1851.
So just so I'm clear, Robin, that treaty, did it specify land where settlers could pass through? Or did it... were there very specific parameters governing where the settlers could be? And most of it was reserved to the native people, or was it not like that? Was it more kind of a fluid agreement?
It was a pretty fluid agreement with some specifics on it. Settlers were allowed to pass through unharmed if they were not harming us or harming our property or basically doing anything that we didn't want to have done on our land.
And so was it understood in that treaty that the settlers could not homestead within those native lands?
They could not homestead within those lands unless they were given permission from the tribes. And one thing that I want people to understand about our tribal governments and how these treaties were signed, we never had presidents. We never had things. We were very, very autonomous living groups of people. So when you hear all of the names that are on a treaty, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single family or subband or clan that we had was on board with this treaty. The U.S. government really didn't understand our makeup of government. But yes, the basis of the treaty was that we could basically rule ourselves. We were the kings of our castle, and we could say you can't pass through, you can't settle, and they didn't say that we couldn't ask for toll taxes. So that was something that went on. We would often have settlers say you have to give us an ox or a cow in order to go through. There were a lot of things that was happening in the history that these people were doing. So I mean, it's a very detailed history back there, but the treaty was standing congressional law. So, and it still is technically. Treaties are supposed to be upheld, and that's according to Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution.
Okay, so 1851, then what?
1851, treaty was broken. There were some settlers that were attacked, and a cow was killed. There were different things and then the settlers decided that they would call on Washington and say, hey, these natives are accosting us. And we would say, well, you told us that this is our land, so they need to stay off of our land. It can't be settled. And the U.S. government, under pressure from the people, of course, decided that they would send in Army brigades to protect settlers and that sort of thing, which caused an all-out war between the Oceti-Sakowin or the Sioux Nation and the U.S. government at that point. And that war kept going on until 1868 when the Treaty of Fort Laramie was signed.
Okay, so let's just go back to that, because I'm guessing that's important, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a factual disagreement as to who originally broke that 1851 treaty and whether it's still therefore enforceable?
There is. So the U.S. government's official story on that was that we broke the treaties because we attacked Army regiments and settlers. Our story is that we own the land, and there's nothing in there saying that we can't defend our land. So we're going to defend our land, and our natural resources, which at that time were buffalo and our water rights, our fishing rights, our crops, those sort of things that were, we're protecting that from basically intrusion. And this is something that people need to realize. The tribes were not, naive to what had happened throughout the whole eastern United States that was east of the Mississippi River. We knew what was happening there, and that there were relatives in distant tribes and things like that had been severely disenfranchised. And we had seen the wars we've had wars with the Spanish, the French. We've dealt with Europeans before. So.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, we're going into the first break. I will be carrying on this very interesting history with Robin Drain when we get back after the break. I'm talking to activist Robin Drain about the relationship between the native peoples of this land and the rest of us. Robin, when we went into the break, we were talking about this foundational, one might say, Treaty of 1851, which the U.S. government claims was broken by the native peoples, but the native peoples claim was not broken by them because they were actually acting in self-defense against settlers that were not passing through under the terms of in a manner consistent with the terms of the treaty, right? So what is it that the settlers were doing that the natives felt they had to defend themselves against?
They were hunting on our land, and they were not doing so. They were not peaceful people. They weren't. So there were issues that Native people had brought up, that they had been accosted, that certain people had been shot at, because there was a fear of Native people. I mean, just an Indian on a horse back then was enough to get you shot. So they were very fearful people on the settler side. So they weren't being very nice to us, and they were using our land and our resources, and that was a part of the treaty that was not there. They were not allowed to do that. That was our land and our resources.
Okay, so that makes sense. One might say that given the cultural context of the time, the idea that a treaty like that could hold peacefully was probably naive.
I think it was, and I think that these treaties were meant to quell Indian uprisings. I don't think they were ever written to be kept. I think that they were trying to fool the Indian into doing what they needed to do. It was. I don't think the U.S. government ever entered into these treaties actually upholding them. However, according to the Constitution, that's right. It's law.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're saying really they were a political expedient at the time, but now what we're trying to do is make the U.S. government lie in the bed that they made.
Correct.
So that's 1851. So what happens from there?
From 1851, there was a war. It was called Red Cloud's War. Red Cloud was a Sioux leader. He was a war chief, and it was called his war. So they fought very hard and nasty. There were a lot of massacres. There were a lot of things that happened between 1851 and 1868. 1868, the U.S. government realizes that they're fighting a formidable force. We're far from D.C. Everything is going on, and they need to snip this out. And also, this is during the time that the U.S. government is going through a war of its own. It's the War of the North and the South, the Civil War. So in 1868, they decide we don't have the manpower nor the want to continue this war with these people, and they weren't doing so well in that war. So in 1868, they signed a treaty with the Ocetchee-Sakowin, again, the Great Sioux Nation, and there were some land secessions from the 1851 treaty, okay? These land secessions were not huge land secessions. They were just some secessions where settlers had already settled, breaking the 1851 treaty. Okay, so they ceded some land. The Sioux ceded some land in this 1868 treaty. However, it still was a very big chunk of North and South Dakota and a small part of Wyoming and Montana in 1868 when that treaty was written. So, but there were some land secessions there. And that treaty was swiftly broken, it was not so hot. Then the Fetterman Massacre happened, and they basically took some of our most sacred sites, the Black Hills.
So when you say so, it was broken by the settling of more land that was actually reserved to the Indians?
It was broken when the settlers found gold in the Black Hills. The Black Hills are the most sacred site to Sioux people. It's kind of seen as the center of our beginning. It's the fire that keeps us all there. That's what the Black Hills were seen as. But they found gold in the Black Hills. And once you find gold, like any, system, they're going to want to go in there and mine it, just like the black gold today. If you find oil, you're in the money, you want to mine it. So the government saw this free enterprise of settlers going in and mining the gold by protection of the U.S. government, something that would benefit the economy of the United States and also, expand their territory, because these weren't states at the time. They were only territories. So when the gold was found, settlers started moving in, which was they were mining a natural resource that was technically ours. It was our natural resource. We didn't use gold. We didn't have a use for gold. So yeah, it stayed in the ground. But it's still ours. If we don't want to use it, we don't have to use it.
And would there be any dispute as to, with respect to the 51 and 68 treaties, that those resources on that land were Indian?
The U.S. Supreme Court in 1981 or 1989, maybe. I don't remember which year it was. It was in the 80s. The U.S. Supreme Court, the Sioux Nation actually sued the Supreme Court, or sued the U.S. government, and said, you guys broke the 1868 treaty. And the Supreme Court said, yep, we did. The U.S. government broke it. They acknowledged that they broke standing law. And what the Native people wanted, what the Sioux Nation wanted, was the land back. That's what they wanted. They wanted to control the area of the land. They weren't asking anybody to move. They just wanted all of the towns and everything to be under their jurisdiction as a tribe. And the U.S. government said, no, we're not going to do that, but we will pay you fair market value for what it was worth back in 1868. So I think they awarded like $1 million or something, which is now still sitting in a bank in the Treasury of the United States, and it's worth over $1 billion, and the Sioux Nation has never taken it. So a lot of people I've heard in this conversation about this pipeline, just pay them off. That's all they want is money and all this kind of stuff. No, it doesn't work that way, because we have a lot of money. The Sioux Nation has a lot of money sitting in an account with the U.S. Treasury, and we've never taken it. So
okay, so let's keep following this timeline, because this is pretty fascinating, right?
Yeah. So after 1868, everything happens. There is the Battle of Little Bighorn, where the U.S. military was militarily defeated on its own field of battle by the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations, and Custer got his dues. There's a monument there still today in Little Bighorn.
Was the actual trigger for this battle the U.S. government trying to enable these settlers to come in and take the gold?
Yes.
That was the cause of it. That was the flashpoint. Okay,
it was the cause of it. We were defending our sacred sites and our land, and this was our land. We didn't need anybody telling us this is our land. We didn't have deeds when these people came over, but even according to their own laws, it was ours. So the general consensus at this time between tribal leaders was that the United States government would create a law that we had to follow, but they could break at any time. That's how that's a general consensus between Native Americans even today.
Absolutely.
Their laws are not, they don't have to follow their laws, but we do. And if we don't, we wind up in prison or worse. Right. So that's what, I mean, it's a culmination that's happened over a span of broken treaties all over the country. So, and then in 1891, the Wounded Knee Massacre happened, which was some of the last bands of what was called hostile Sioux people were, coming back to the reservation. Reservation lines had been built, and this was a major secession of land. At that time...
Sorry, what was a major secession? You're saying in 1891, there was Another treaty, or
between 1868 and 1891, the U.S. government had created something that was actually considered what we consider a reservation today. Okay. And they're actually considered still under U.S. law prisoner of war camps. They're not actually considered, and the reservation is land set aside for Indian use. But according to the Department of the Interior, every single reservation in this country actually has a prisoner of war camp number on it. So that's another interesting bit of history, that they created these prisoner of war camps, called them reservations, and said, we will give you anything that you need, but you have to let go of your ways. You have to let go of hunting, going as you please, coming and going as you please. We're going to give you schools. We're going to give you flour, all of this kind of stuff. So that's what's happened up till then.
Okay, fascinating stuff. I'm learning a lot here, Robin. We are going into the second break. Back soon. Stairway Press is pleased to announce the publication of Robin Koerner's first book, If You Can Keep It, Why We Nearly Lost It and How We Get It Back. Jeffrey Tucker in the book's foreword wrote, "We seek to end government as we know it, but that is not the whole of what we seek. We also favor something beautiful. Explaining what this looks like and the rhetorical apparatus that necessarily accompanies this is the greatest value of Koerner's book." Barry Farber, award-winning talk show host, wrote, "Robin Koerner's political, psychological and philosophical rampage through today's America, turning on lights we didn't even know were off, takes more and more of your intellectual breath away according to how high you rated intellectually in the first place." Chris Ann Hall, constitutional attorney and educator, says, "Robin Koerner is a defender of liberty and a true lover of America's constitutional republic. The knowledge that Robin brings to his readers is sure to be instrumental in the restoration of our American foundational principles." If You Can Keep It by Robin Koerner, published by Stairway Press. Go to ifyoucankeepit.us for your pre-ordered, personally signed copy. I'm learning so much here, Robin. I really appreciate your coming on the show to explain this to me and my listeners. Now, what you just said at the end of the last segment was particularly, compelling in a way to me, because I do a lot of writing about the damage done by the welfare state. And basically, it sounds like the Americans said to you, not the original Americans, the new Americans said to you as a people, we'll treat you nice, just become complete welfare cases in every aspect of your lives and let us run them for you. In other words, you'll be slaves, but you'll be comfortable slaves.
Correct. And that's when the mentality and the actual on-paper, this was an on-paper slogan, was "Kill the Indian, save the man." So they wanted to civilize us. So they
where did that appear?
Schools.
That's hugely, that's amazing, because I'm always talking about how culture precedes politics. And that sounds, that's a cultural meme, if ever there was one, right? So where and how was that being used?
It was being used all over the United States in boarding schools. So they would take children forcibly from their parents and put them in boarding schools. This boarding school nightmare went from the 1840s in this country, and it has gone up until the early 1990s. Boarding schools still exist today, but they aren't really, they're not as terrible as they used to be. But these places were absolutely terrible.
Now, hold on. Just so I'm clear, I'm British. Boarding schools was where we were the crucibles of all those men that went out and built the empire, right? We still have them. They're basically private schools where you pay lots of money and you tend to get a really good education. But the point about boarding school is that you have to live and sleep there as opposed to at home with your parents. Does it mean, what part of that is included in the term boarding school here with respect to the natives?
We had to live there, and it was English only. There are multiple horror stories from all of these years, and still people alive today, including grandparents of people that are my age, who were subjected to boarding schools and forcibly removed by social services for things as little as, them saying, oh, they didn't have good living conditions because they were poor. But these people were getting, good, wholesome upbringings. It's just that they happened to be poor. So they came up with any excuse to take a Native child. And actually, it still goes on today. Native children are removed from their homes at a higher rate than any other race in the United States.
And this is done by what? State-run social services?
federal social services and tribal social services. And another thing to know about tribal governments of today, they're all subsidiaries of the United States government. They cannot exist without the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We can't pass laws without getting the Bureau of Indian Affairs to sign off on it, these kind of things. So we're not really sovereign, even though we're supposed to be. But that's a big meaty chunk that probably will go into a whole nother show.
Okay, yeah, sure.
But when we get into, so all of this stuff is happening that they're trying to take everything away from us, our culture, our language. People are being beaten for speaking their language, having Christianity beaten into them as well, and all of these things. So their idea, the U.S. government's idea, is to kill the Indian, save the man. So make you culturally white, introduce you to stationary and stagnant farming, as if we had never farmed before in our lives. But they just wanted to do that. So, and that's what they eventually did. And there were a bunch of reorganizations and things like that that happened throughout this part of the world. So 1890 all the way to the 1900s, the 1940s, up to the 1970s even. Reorganizations were happening of tribes and that sort of thing. And so all of this is going on at the time. So up until we weren't seen as U.S. citizens until, I believe, 1924. And then we weren't legally allowed to practice our religions until 1978. So this is things that people can remember. My parents can remember having to do things in private if they wanted to get these.
Now, hold on a second. So hold on a second. If you were not, as a people, United States citizens, then you were not under U.S. legal jurisdiction, right, when it comes with respect to specific laws. So how could you be prevented from practicing your religion? Like, how was that done and on what basis?
Might makes right. So we were not seen as citizens. We had no rights to vote, no rights to do anything, but we also were under we were wards of the U.S. government. We were wards of the state. They gave us Indian agents through the BIA, through the Department of the Interior, all of those kind of things. That was just, it was might makes right. There was no way to get away from it.
It's fascinating to me because, obviously I come from the country that built the empire. And even the imperialists didn't do it quite that way. I mean, even back in the, the early 19th century, there was more, not everywhere, but in many instances, there was more engagement of the ruled in the way they were ruled. Whereas what you're talking about here really is basically treating a whole people like children. Basically, the U.S. government putting itself in loco parentis with respect to the Indian, right?
Yes. And a very interesting fact is that one of our favorite villains in history, named Adolf Hitler, used the reservation system as a way to subjugate the Jews into concentration camps in the 1940s.
As you say that,
I wrote about that.
Yes, and actually, to be fair, and I feel like I have to qualify what I've just said. Hitler did also say, I think, or no, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the first one. No, I think it was Hitler who also said that he got the idea from the concentration camps from the British Empire too. So there were obviously a few presidents that we in the Anglo world, unfortunately, gave to the likes of Hitler. And
right.
Yes.
It's a terrible history. Those scars are very alive today. And that's another thing I want people to know. I've had a lot of people tell me, get over it, Robin. All of it's in the past. And I'm like, well, a lot of it is in the past. And there are certain things that we can't change. However, I think that people need to realize that there are still people alive today who didn't have citizenship when they were born. There are still people alive today who couldn't practice their religion. And all of the people alive today still have to deal with the wounds of being a ward of the state that has absolutely no rights over their own economy on reservation land. So that's something that is going into today.
Okay.
Yeah.
So carry on, because I know this is such a big story, and I've been interrupting you, but I really want to get to where we stand in North Dakota.
It's good that this is getting out, and I appreciate you for asking me the questions and having me today. So fast forward to 1944, the Flood Control Act of 1944 was passed with the New Deal. It was a New Deal thing. They had built 5 dams since 1892 over the Missouri River, which is bringing us back to what's happening in North Dakota today. Those dams were causing some flooding issues further south. So right where we're at right now, protesting a pipeline that is supposed to go under the Missouri River, in that general vicinity in the 1950s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in and actually took over the land. They used eminent domain to say that some of the land on either side of the Missouri River was theirs because they needed to control some flooding that was happening. And there were Sioux people that were living in this floodplain. So in order for them to dredge the Missouri River to stop some of this flooding, they had to make these people move, and they were moved by force. There was a ton of families who said, I don't want to go. They were somewhat compensated for some of their land if it was privately owned, not if it was on reservation. So that's one thing to know. You cannot own private property on the reservation. And that's a major issue with our economies today. But so they took the land, bulldozed some homes, and they dredged the river. These families were taken off their land, basically. And so everything that happened, and the people continued to live in a community called Cannonball, which is on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. There's a graveyard about 20 yards away from where they're wanting to put this pipeline through. And there are some sacred sites that we've maintained from, back in the day, prayer circles, graveyards, that sort of thing that you can't see with the naked eye, but we know are there. We have rock stone effigies and all of this kind of stuff. When Dakota Access and Energy Transfer Partners originally started building this, there was no impact statement made to tribes. They say that they tried to meet with the Standing Rock tribe umpteen times and they refused. But I think one thing to people to know about tribal politics is that there's just as much bureaucracy in tribal politics as there are in U.S. politics, because when the U.S. introduced us to the systems of law that we have today, they're the law of the colonizer. So these aren't traditional ways that we do. We don't have, chiefs and sub-bands and bands and all of this kind of stuff that we used to have in our government systems that were actually very autonomous. They were very libertarian in a lot of ways that they were set up. So all of that aside, there was still no environmental impact statement done, and the tribe was not able to basically say, no, you can't do this because you're going to disturb these sacred sites of ours, which is another kind of issue between the right, libertarians, Republicans, and things like that, and the left. I've heard a lot of Republicans and libertarians say it's an arrowhead hunt to stop free enterprise. But at the same time, these are lands that were ours up until 1851 and 1868 and all of this kind of stuff. So we still have a tie to that land, and it was still our land before it was illegally taken from us.
Just to be clear, the basis of the claim now is that it's still your land, right?
There's
a violation of retained property rights.
Correct. We want the U.S. government to honor the treaties of 1851 and 1868 and give us our land back. That's what we want. And when things are happening like this, they're twofold. They're violating the treaties again, which have already been violated for years, but they're violating them again to add insult to injury. And they're also going to cause environmental harm because they have the potential to. When they were originally putting through the Dakota Access Pipeline, they actually were going to put it away from the reservation going north of Mandan, Bismarck, which is a white community. It's a majority white community in North Dakota. They were going to put this in their backyard. And Mandan, Bismarck got together and we said, oh, no, we don't want this in our backyard because it's a pipeline. With these pipelines, they see an increase in crime. They see an increase against crime against women. They see sex trafficking. They see all of these things that come in with these crews and with these workers. They see increased drug usage. They see all of these things that impact their communities. And then they're also kind of nervous. What if this thing breaks? What if there's an environmental impact on our water supply? So Mandan Bismarck got together and they told them, no, we don't want it here. So Dakota Access goes back to the drawing board and they said, we're going to move it to a low impact area. That low impact area just so happens to be half a mile from the standing border of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. And it's going to affect them first if something does environmentally happen. But we're talking about a community that already has high alcoholism, already has high drug abuse, already has high violence against women. And we're going to bring all of this stuff in. So there are a lot of different factors onto why the tribe does not want it there. A lot of them are going from the environmental way that water is life, because we believe as Native people, and especially Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota people, that water is our first medicine given to us by our creation. By our creator. Water was our first medicine. That is basically, a lot of people liken it to a mother's milk coming out because we believe in, Unchimaka, which is grandmother earth. We believe that. So we believe that water is our first medicine. So if you're going to do something that is going to adversely affect our water, then we're very nervous about that. And there are already existing pipelines going under the Missouri River. I don't want anybody to think that this is the first one. There are. However, this is a new one, and this could adversely affect it. We're saying, why don't you fix the ones that you already have, and maybe, do that, or become less dependent on fossil fuels and those sort of things. So there are different aspects that are coming in, both from the left and the right. And I just happen to be a libertarian, so I want to go at it from a property rights standpoint so that people don't get turned off by, tree hugging, is what they would see us as, or hippies or whatever. I don't want that to come into it. But there are a lot of different effects that are coming down.
Okay, so, there are only less than 2 minutes now in this segment, so and I know we're dealing with some big issues here, but I just want to be clear again. It seems to me that you have a very different argument when you're saying don't send something through the land that we agree is our land, and please don't send something close in case something goes wrong and there's an indirect effect, right?
Correct.
And so are both arguments being made?
I don't think the property rights argument is being made or given the forefront that it needs to be made, because I think the left is really kind of clinging to the environmental impact. However, one thing that I think that the left needs to realize is that under property rights, this is why property rights were ever fathomed by human beings. They take care of so much. They take care of our environment. They take care of our everything. If we centrally hold property rights as the most sacred right, then we have the backup to protect our environments in the way that we see fit.
Presumably you would be able to stomach a solution that simply does not send any pipeline under your land. If the cost of that was that a safe, an agreed to be safe pipeline was running close to it. Would that would be reasonable, right?
I think that it is not, I don't think that it's up to the Sioux Nation to come up with an alternative for Dakota Access. Sure. I think that Energy Transfer Partners needs to go back to the drawing board and actually figure out what they can do and present it to us. So that is what they need to do. It's not our responsibility to figure out where they're going to put their pipeline. We just don't want it through our water.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robin. We are going into the break. I hope this has given all of you a deeper background to what's going on in North Dakota and in other parts of our country right now. Robin, if folks want to actually understand what it is you've been saying, the perspective, this property rights perspective that you've been taking on this issue, which is so, so important. What do you suggest they start Googling, or where should they go? Send them to the right resources.
I think that a good place to start is standingrock.org, which is the tribal website. They have a lot of information on what they're doing to fight this. And then also just research the treaties yourselves, because I can talk about them all day long. But the 1851 and 1868 Fort Laramie treaties are very important here, and what is going to, affect us. And I think that's the only leg that we really have to stand on against the U.S. government. I mean, in a property rights scheme, but it's just what it is. We have to find some way to protect our land, and I think and protect our sovereignty.
Thanks, Robin. And I just before the show closes out, I want to again thank my friend and colleague Paul Addis that put me on to Robin, whom I've been speaking with. I just want to kind of shout out to Paul because he actually went to North Dakota to stand with some of the tribes people there, because he also is a property rights loving libertarian. And he gets this. So I'm grateful to him, not just for his standing up on this issue, but for putting me in touch with you, Robin, so that I could learn, a lot more about this. I mean, and I just want to say there's about 5.5 million Native Americans, right, in the United States. It's about 5.5, right?
I know that we make up a little less than 2% of the U.S. population. I don't know the actual numbers.
That would be about right.
567 federally recognized tribes.
Okay.
But we're also the only race of the world that has to have proof that we're the race. We're with dogs and horses there. Yeah. They quantify us by blood. So there you go.
Yeah, that is kind of extraordinary in this day and age, and that's probably a whole other show. With which we end this show, and thank you very much for being with me. Liberty with Love with Robin Koerner, and if there is a topic that should come under the banner, Liberty with Love, these people deserve both of those things. Thank you again.
Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.